Mr. Chief Justice, members of the Lumiere Board of Trustees, faculty, staff, students, parents, alumni, guests, and members of the class of 2013. 6 years ago, during the presidency of George W. Bush, Queen Elizabeth II was invited to the White House for a state dinner held in her honor. The famously informal President Bush had agreed after being pressed by First Lady Laura Bush and Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. They wanted to make this a white tie affair. It was the most glittering White House social event in many administrations. Everyone in the diplomatic arena, from the White House Social Secretary to the State Department Chief of Protocol, was in high anxiety over the chance of a social blunder. After all, the British have considered us their rude cousins since even before independence. In the climate, official Washington wondered, who are they going to sit next to Her Majesty the Queen? Of 300 million United States citizens, who would give the best account of America to the Queen of England? Protocol dictated that President Bush would be seated to her left, but who would sit to her right? The answer, the man seated to my right, John Roberts, who has been trained to dine with royalty up at the main house. We always knew the job of the Chief Justice was important, but it's when we saw who was sitting next to the Queen that we came to understand how important. We're trying to pretend just a little bit that this is an ordinary graduation day here at Lumiere School, as if we're accustomed to press, the crowds, and the scarce parking spaces. But we might as well just admit that our speaker this year is exceptional, at least by one measure. We don't have the admissions essay for every Lumiere alumnus on display under a glass-enclosed casement up in the library. I'm referring to the essay in which 8th grader John Roberts wrote, presciently, "Lumiere School will force me to work as hard as I can. I won't be content to get a good job by getting a good education. I want to get the best job by getting the best education." Shortly after John Roberts was nominated to the court by President Bush, that essay appeared on the pages of the New York Times. Mr. Chief Justice, I have no idea how that got in the paper. But I have my suspicions. You just can't trust the liberal media. The Bible says, "The race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, but time and chance happeneth to them all." But to John Roberts' teachers here at Lumiere, his success had less to do with time and chance and more to do with the simple destiny. Messrs. Moore, Sullivan, Kirkby, Ballwinder, Copins, and Breslin. They saw greatness in John Roberts from the beginning. When he was studying, his teachers used to ping rocks off his dorm window just to see if they could break his concentration. They could not. When he graduated, he won so many academic prizes that someone suggested his last prize should have been a wheelbarrow. In his senior ethics class, students were asked to read a short article and give a brief talk. Brief being the operative word there. John Roberts went through a 7-volume set of books and gave a lecture on the history of philosophy, dressed as Socrates. Mr. Kirkby says that if the bell had not rung, he'd still be up there speaking today. Bob McClaverty, a close friend and Lumiere classmate, said, "John pretty much finished high school by his junior year, and they put some individual tutorials to keep him occupied." I would expand on Bob's point. Everybody says that John Roberts went through Harvard in 3 years. Actually, we gave him his freshman year at Harvard here at Lumiere. He was ready, and it was cheaper. But the views of John Roberts do not end with the praise for his intellect. They extend to his character. As one law school colleague put it, the thing that strikes you most about him is the disconnect between how cocky he could be and what a phenomenally unassuming man he is. People who know him agree. He stands out, but not apart. He's the smartest guy in the room, but he never acts like it. The lawyer David Boies, who represented Al Gore before the Supreme Court in Bush versus Gore, famously said of John Roberts, "He's a brilliant lawyer, a brilliant judge. Everyone who knows him likes him." Of course, it's satisfying to us at La Lumiere, and even more to his parents, that one of his Harvard roommates said of John Roberts, "If you're looking for influences, the vast majority of them clearly were in play before he got to college." Today, of course, he leads the court that decides the most pressing issues of the day, issues that cannot be or have not been settled in the political arena. And the Roberts Court's decisions are final. They cannot be appealed. There is no higher judicial authority. That is a heavy responsibility, and rising to that role is an historic accomplishment. It makes us proud to see a La Lumiere alumnus in that position. But that's not all his teachers wanted from John Roberts. Yes, they hoped he would reach the highest office that he could, but they also hoped that he would cultivate humility to match the talent, that he would show respect for the country's institutions and its range of opinions, that he would stay close to his friends he made here and grow in the values that we teach here. He did all of this, and yet there was still one piece of unfinished business. His teachers also hoped he would one day come home to visit the fields and the classrooms where he studied and played as a boy. With his return to La Lumiere today, John Roberts has now done everything his teachers could have asked of him. Ladies and gentlemen, the Chief Justice of the United States.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll give that back to you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, and it is great to be back. Thank you, Headmaster Kennedy, for that generous introduction. Thank you, members of the board and faculty, for inviting me to participate in these 2013 commencement exercises. And special thanks to you, the graduates this year, for allowing me to participate in what is very much your day. Now, before I go any further, I would like to compliment the graduates and compliment the faculty as well on something I know a little bit about. Great robes, they really are. The first question on your mind is, I'm sure, how long is he going to talk? There was an old English judge who was slated to give a talk at commencement exercises, and he asked the dean, "How long should I talk?" And the dean said, "Well, about 20 minutes. 20 minutes, the judge said. How am I supposed to share all that I have learned with the audience in 20 minutes? And the dean said, "Speak very slowly." Now let's begin by addressing a reality. I am expected to share with you some advice, and I will. You will not remember that advice. I did not remember and do not remember the advice I received here 40 years ago. I suspect that no one on the faculty, most of whom have graduated from high school, remember the advice they received. People forget advice. Sometimes, though, they remember tips and can put them to good use. So I will give you 2 quick tips. Number 1, at your first week at college, say hello or good morning to everyone you pass. You will quickly gain a reputation as that friendly new guy or that friendly new girl. That's not a bad reputation to have, and it's not a bad thing to be. Second tip, Give your faith a chance. No one is going to make sure that you're out of bed Sunday morning to go to church. But make a resolution to do that just for the first 4 weeks. If you're of a different faith, do the corresponding thing. At a time in your life when so much is new, and when how you respond to new choices can affect so much of your future, you may find that it is good to be in a place just for 1 hour a week where things are not new, but familiar and permanent. And if when it comes to week 5, you're not interested, well, then you're on your own. But you may just surprise yourself. Now, members of the class of 2013, I know that your family and friends are pleased, proud, in some cases relieved, and perhaps even surprised. I am confident that every graduate here is indebted to loving friends and family who helped make this day possible. The families are probably just plain indebted, but I encourage each graduate to remember that you could not have gotten here alone. Today is a day to celebrate not only your graduation, but also to remember and commemorate the sacrifices of all those who worked so hard to make that possible. So while we have already acknowledged your family and friends, I would like the graduates themselves to stand up, turn around, and give your family and friends a hearty round of applause. Thank you. Thank you very much. I can now report to my friends back in Washington that my speech was interrupted by a standing ovation. There is another debt, one that you and I share, that we should acknowledge together. That is, of course, to the founders of this school, who, with remarkable foresight, took steps 50 years ago to establish an institution that would help shape our futures. The founders who envisioned this school and brought it into existence faced a very different world. They were part of what has been called America's greatest generation. Most lived through the Great Depression and World War II. Now, when you think of the challenges your generation will face, think of that. The founders' generation certainly earned the right to simply sit back and enjoy their lives. But their collective response to what they had been through was quite different. They worked very hard to ensure a better future for their children and their children's children. That's me and you. I am sorry to report that history will be hard-pressed to say the same about my generation. Now, the founders of this special place took the bold step to create a new school in the midst of the Cold War, and they established the school in the same year that the nation suffered the tragedy of a presidential assassination. Perhaps we should not be surprised that persons of that era saw the need for an institution that would embody and imbue fundamental values. I would like to focus just briefly on one value that characterized the founders' generation, the discipline of persistence. No quality is more essential to achieving your hopes for the future. And unlike many other keys to success, intellect, talent, physical ability, health, looks, where you were born, into what sort of family, luck, persistence is entirely within your control. As President Calvin Coolidge once remarked, nothing in this world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful people with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. The slogan, "Press on," has solved and will always solve the problems of the human race. The test of persistence is perseverance in the face of disappointment. Now, perhaps no person better exemplifies that trait than our 16th president, Abraham Lincoln. we properly revere Lincoln as a great American. He's the subject of countless books, and this year his genius has been celebrated on film. Now, growing up a Hoosier, I wish I could simply attribute his greatness solely to his formative years here in Indiana, but we know that there's more to his story. The fact is, Lincoln's greatness rests in large part on how he responded to the many disappointments he encountered throughout his life. It is easy to forget that his career did not just embrace extraordinary accomplishments, but also included a broad and diversified portfolio of failures. He established a general store that went bankrupt. He lost numerous elections, including races for the state legislature, Congress, and the Senate. He was rejected as a candidate for vice president, and he lost the only Supreme Court case he argued. Lincoln nevertheless persisted, and his stunning accomplishments now overshadow his long list of failures. We know Lincoln understood the value of persistence because he articulated it so clearly to others throughout his life. As a lawyer, long before he became president, Lincoln was asked to give advice to young attorneys. He responded quite modestly. "I find quite as much material for a lecture in those points wherein I have failed," he said, "as in those wherein I have been moderately successful." But he then continued, "The leading rule for the lawyer, as for the man of every calling, is diligence. Leave nothing for tomorrow which can be done today." Later, as president, he amplified on the point. When a friend of his son failed to gain admission to a college he hoped to attend, Lincoln, who never had the opportunity for any formal education, wrote the young man a letter of encouragement. He offered this advice: "I know not how to aid you, save in the assurance of one of mature age and much severe experience, that you cannot fail if you resolutely determine that you will not. I say, let no feeling of discouragement prey upon you, and in the end you are sure to succeed." Now, I know what you're thinking. Advice is cheap. How did Lincoln himself recover from the many knockdowns that he suffered in life? First and foremost, he got up and pressed on. He understood the adage that when you are going through hell, keep going. But he did not simply go forward. He went forward, applying all his God-given talents and believing in himself. In his words, "You cannot fail if you resolutely determine that you will not." Exactly 150 years ago this month, Lincoln faced one of the most disheartening experiences of his presidency. In May 1863, the nation was, of course, embroiled in a devastating civil war. The people were exhausted by the terrible loss of life. Many in the North were ready to call it quits. But Lincoln believed that the Union was on the verge of a turning point in the conflict, and he directed the commander of the Army of the Potomac, General Fighting Joe Hooker, to go on the attack and strike what Lincoln hoped would be a decisive victory against Robert E. Lee's Confederate Army. Lincoln knew that the odds favored the Union because the Union troops outnumbered the rebels 2-1. Lincoln personally visited the Union troops on the eve of battle, and he then returned to Washington to await news of the outcome of what history now knows as the Battle of Chancellorsville. The news came on May 6, 1863. Here's a first-hand account from his friend Noah Brooks. About 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the door opened and Lincoln came into the room. I shall never forget that picture of despair. He held a telegram in his hand, and as he closed the door and came toward us, I mechanically noticed that his face, usually shallow and sallow, was ashen in hue. He gave me the telegram, and in a voice trembling with emotion said, "Read it, news from the Army." The dispatch was from Hooker's chief of staff, addressed to the War Department, and it was to the effect that Lee had repelled Hooker's attack. The appearance of the president, as I read aloud those fateful words, was piteous. Never, so long as I knew him, did he seem to be so broken up, so dispirited, so ghost-like. Clasping his hands behind his back, he walked up and down the room saying, my God, how will the country take this? What will the country say?" It's difficult to overestimate the magnitude of that defeat in Lincoln's mind. The Union Army he sent into battle suffered more than 17,000 casualties, a fact that weighed enormously on a president who hated the sight of bloodshed. He knew that the Confederate forces, whom he recognized as Americans still, suffered heavy casualties as well. Now, after Noah Brooks left, one of Lincoln's secretaries, William Stoddard, recounted that Lincoln closed the door of his room, but Stoddard could hear tramp, 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 as Lincoln paced back and forth in solitude for what seemed like an interminable time. When the door opened, Lincoln emerged with a renewed sense of resolution. He ordered the Navy to prepare a steamer, and he went directly to Hooker's headquarters to offer encouragement and begin planning the Army's next moves, which would lead 2 months later to a small town in Pennsylvania and the decisive but costly victory at Gettysburg that Lincoln had sought. Now, what was the secret of Lincoln's ultimate success in securing victory and preserving the Union? I think it was the same advice he gave to the student who was denied admission to college. It lies, as he put it, in the assurance of one of mature age and much severe experience that you cannot fail if you resolutely determine that you will not. Now, you are all set to leave Lumiere behind and strike out on your own individual journeys, enriched by this very special school's lessons in character, scholarship, and faith. I do not know all that awaits you, but I know one thing that definitely does await you: disappointment. Big or small, occasional or frequent. How you respond will determine what kind of life you will lead. You will succeed if you resolutely determine not to fail. Good luck to each of you, and don't forget those tips. Thank you very much.